I was only 25, still carrying scars from my past, too afraid to trust, too afraid to love. But then I met him, a man so powerful, so different from anyone I had known. His touch broke through my walls, and suddenly, love didn't feel like a risk anymore. Before I share this story, if you've ever been scared to love again, but secretly hoped someone would see your worth, please subscribe, like this video, and comment your story. You never know who might need your words today. I was 25, but sometimes it felt like I had already lived a lifetime of heartbreak. On the surface, I looked like any other young woman trying to piece together her life, going to work, paying bills, showing up for friends when I could. But inside, I carried scars that never seemed to fade. People often told me I had a bright smile, but if they had looked a little closer, they might have noticed how forced it was, how it never quite reached my eyes. My story of love had started beautifully once, or so I believed. I thought I had met the man who would stay. He promised me forever with words that melted into my skin, and I trusted every single one of them. I gave him my heart, raw and unguarded, believing love was supposed to be that way. But what I got in return was betrayal so sharp it left me breathless. He didn't just leave, he left loudly, humiliating me in front of people I thought were friends, making me feel small, like I wasn't worth loyalty or kindness. I remember standing there, too stunned to cry, watching him walk away with someone else as if I was disposable. Since then, I promised myself I wouldn't be fooled again. I built walls around my heart so high that even I struggled to see over them. Every smile I gave was calculated, every conversation guarded. Whenever anyone asked if I was dating, I laughed it off and said, "I'm focusing on myself right now," when in truth, I was just afraid. Afraid to risk the pain of being left again. Afraid to let anyone see how deeply I could love. Because what if they didn't handle it with care? My days became predictable. Wake up, drag myself out of bed, push through work, eat something simple for dinner, scroll endlessly on my phone, then fall asleep with the TV playing just to fill the silence. Loneliness crept into everything, into the way I avoided romantic movies, into the way I tuned out love songs on the radio. Even with friends around, I often felt like I was performing, as if saying "I'm fine" enough times would convince me it was true. But if I'm being honest, there was a quiet ache I couldn't silence. Deep down, I still wanted love. I still dreamed about it on nights when my guard slipped, when the loneliness grew heavier than my pride. I imagined someone who would see me, really see me, beyond the scars and the fear, someone who wouldn't treat my heart like a game. Still, those thoughts scared me, so I buried them under routines and distractions, pretending I was content. What I didn't know back then was that fate has a way of sneaking up on you when you least expect it. It doesn't arrive with warnings or gentle knocks. It breaks in, uninvited, shifting everything you thought was permanent. And while I thought my story with love was already over, life was quietly preparing to prove me wrong. It happened on one of those days that didn't feel special at all. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that makes everything look a little dull. I had gone to a small coffee shop near my office, the kind of place I often retreated to when I needed a break from the monotony of my routine. I wasn't expecting anything except a cup of strong coffee to keep me awake, and maybe a quiet corner where I could scroll through my phone and disappear from the world for a while. I remember fumbling through my bag at the counter, realizing I had left my wallet in my desk drawer back at work. Panic pricked at me, and I was about to step aside, embarrassed, when a calm voice behind me said, "I'll take care of it." I turned around, ready to refuse, and that's when I saw him. He wasn't dressed like the wealthy men I had seen in magazines or on television. No tailored suit, no flashy accessories. He wore a simple navy sweater and dark jeans, his hair slightly tousled, his eyes steady but kind. He looked more like a professor or someone you might run into at the library, not a man with unimaginable wealth. I tried to protest, but he just smiled, sliding a bill across the counter as if it was nothing. "Don't worry about it," he said, his tone easy, unbothered. There was no arrogance in his gesture, no expectation that I owed him anything, just quiet generosity. I thanked him quickly, trying to shrink into myself as I carried my coffee to a table. But somehow, he ended up at the one next to mine, as though fate had decided it wasn't done playing its hand. I kept my eyes on my cup, determined not to let this small act of kindness turn into something more. Yet, against my better judgment, I found myself stealing glances at him. There was something about the way he carried himself, confident but not showy, calm but alert, that unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. He caught me looking once, and instead of pretending not to notice, he leaned slightly toward me and said, "It's a good day for strong coffee, isn't it?" His voice was low, warm, the kind of tone that invited you to trust without realizing it. I gave a polite laugh, but inside, my walls immediately went up. I reminded myself not to get too comfortable. Men like him, charming, generous, unbothered, always seemed to have some hidden agenda. Still, I couldn't deny the strange pull I felt. For a moment, sitting there with my hands wrapped around a paper cup, I wasn't just a woman guarding her broken heart. I was a woman noticed, spoken to with ease, and it stirred something inside me I hadn't felt in a long time. I left that coffee shop convinced I would never see him again. But deep down, I already knew the encounter hadn't been an accident. Something had shifted. My story was no longer on pause. It had just been nudged forward by a stranger with a quiet smile and an unexpected kindness. I didn't learn the truth about him right away. To me, he was just the man from the coffee shop, the one who had stepped in without hesitation, then somehow made me laugh about the weather, as if we'd known each other for years. But as the days passed, our paths crossed more often than coincidence could explain. Once at the bookstore downtown, again at a small art gallery a friend had dragged me to, and eventually he invited me to join him for dinner. I almost said no. My instinct was to run, to protect myself, but something about the way he asked, calm, genuine, without any pressure, made it hard to refuse. And so I found myself sitting across from him at a quiet restaurant, the kind of place where the lighting was warm and the music soft enough that you had to lean in a little closer just to hear each other. It was that night I realized he wasn't just some ordinary man. The waiter seemed to know him, greeting him with a familiarity that carried a touch of respect. People glanced at him as we walked in, not in a way that suggested recognition from a magazine cover, but with a quiet acknowledgement that he was someone important. Still, he never acted like it. He pulled out my chair, asked about my day, and listened to my answers as if they mattered more than anything else in the room. It wasn't until later, when his car pulled up, sleek and understated, that the truth began to dawn on me. He didn't flaunt wealth, but it surrounded him in subtle ways. The way the staff treated him, the effortless confidence in his movements, the small details I couldn't ignore. When I asked what he did, he shrugged lightly, almost avoiding the question. "Business," he said with a smile, as though the word was enough. The pieces fell into place over time. A casual mention from someone at the gallery, an article I stumbled across online, the quiet way he handled a phone call during dinner, all of it pointed to a reality I had never expected. He was a billionaire, a man whose world stretched far beyond the edges of mine. That realization should have sent me running. I was just a 25-year-old woman trying to hold herself together. He lived in a world of power, luxury, and influence, a world where I didn't belong. Yet, when he looked at me, I never felt small. He asked about my dreams, my fears, the little things that made me smile. He wasn't trying to impress me with money. He was trying to know me, and that scared me more than anything, because for the first time in years, I felt my guard slipping. I felt seen in a way I hadn't dared to hope for. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of something I couldn't control. The more time I spent with him, the more I found myself caught in a tug of war between fear and desire. He was consistent in ways I wasn't used to, sending a simple message just to ask how my day was, remembering the little details I had carelessly mentioned, showing up when he said he would. His steadiness should have comforted me, but instead, it terrified me. I kept waiting for the mask to slip, for him to reveal himself as just another man who saw my heart as something disposable. There were moments when his kindness felt almost unbearable, like the evening he surprised me with tickets to a small jazz show, because I had once mentioned how the sound of a saxophone reminded me of childhood, or the morning he left a note on my desk at the coffee shop. Nothing grand, just a line telling me to take care of myself because I'd been looking tired. These weren't grand gestures designed to sweep me off my feet. They were intimate reminders that he noticed me, that I mattered. And that was exactly what made me afraid. I had built my identity on the belief that love was dangerous, that letting someone in would only end with me shattered. So every time he got too close, I pulled back. I changed the subject when conversations got deep. I canceled plans at the last minute. I laughed off his compliments like they were jokes. But he never pushed. He never tried to force his way past my defenses. Instead, he waited, as if he understood I needed to come to him on my own terms. That patience, that quiet strength, tested me more than any declaration of love could have. Late at night, when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I questioned myself. Was I pushing away the very thing I had been praying for all along? Was my fear protecting me, or was it keeping me trapped? His presence in my life made those questions impossible to ignore, and deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before something would force me to decide whether to keep running or finally risk my heart. It happened on a night I'll never forget, the kind of night when the world feels unusually still, as if it's holding its breath. We had just finished dinner, nothing extravagant, just a quiet meal where we talked more than we ate. On the way back, the rain started, soft at first, then heavier, until we were both running for cover beneath a small awning. I laughed, half drenched, and for a moment, I felt like a younger version of myself, the girl who used to believe love was simple and safe. He looked at me then, not saying anything, just watching, his eyes steady as though he was memorizing the way I smiled. And that silence made me nervous, because in that silence, I knew I was seen. When we finally reached his car, instead of driving away immediately, he stayed still, his hands resting on the wheel. Then he turned to me and asked the question I had been dreading. Why do you keep holding back from me? My throat tightened. I wanted to deflect, to laugh it off, but the rain beating against the windshield felt like a rhythm I couldn't ignore. My walls cracked, and before I knew it, the words tumbled out. I told him everything, the betrayal, the humiliation, the nights I cried alone, the way I had convinced myself that love was nothing but a cruel trick. I told him I was afraid of giving someone power over me again, afraid that opening up would only end with me broken. When I finished, I felt exposed, raw, like I had stripped myself bare. I expected him to grow quiet, maybe even pull away, but instead he reached across the console and gently took my hand in his. Not forcefully, not urgently, just a simple, steady touch. I'm not here to hurt you, he said softly. I'm here because I see you, and I want to know all of you, even the parts you're afraid of. It wasn't a grand speech, it wasn't dramatic, but something about the sincerity in his voice, the warmth in his touch, pierced through every fear I had carried. In that moment, the walls I had built so carefully began to crumble. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like love was a risk. I didn't feel like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to fall. I felt grounded, safe, even cherished. His touch didn't just comfort me, it reminded me of something I had forgotten. Love could be gentle. That night, sitting in a rain soaked car with my hand in his, I realized I was no longer running. I was finally ready to stop fighting against the possibility of happiness. And that realization changed everything. After that night, something inside me shifted. I didn't wake up suddenly fearless, but I woke up lighter, as if the weight I had been dragging for years wasn't quite as heavy anymore. His touch, his words, the way he listened to the darkest parts of me without flinching, it all stayed with me, replaying in my mind like a song I couldn't forget. Days with him began to feel different. I noticed how my steps carried a little more energy, how my laughter came more easily, how even simple routines like making breakfast or riding the bus to work didn't feel so hollow. I had been living in gray, but now colors were creeping back into my world. My coworkers teased me about glowing. My friends whispered questions about whether I was finally seeing someone. I denied it, of course, out of habit, but inside I knew they were right. Still, the fear didn't vanish. Love, to me, was still a fragile thing, and I couldn't forget how badly it had broken me before. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, whispering to myself, what if he leaves too? What if this is just another beautiful lie? My heart wanted to believe, but my mind kept circling back to old wounds. He seemed to sense it. He never rushed me, never demanded answers or declarations I wasn't ready to give. Instead, he showed me through actions, steady, quiet, consistent. When I doubted, he reminded me with patience. When I hesitated, he gave me space. It was as if he understood that love wasn't about pulling me forward, but walking beside me until I was ready to take the next step myself. One moment stays etched in my memory. We were walking by the waterfront one evening, the city lights reflecting off the waves, a chill in the air. I shivered, and without a word, he wrapped his coat around my shoulders. It wasn't the coat or the warmth that struck me. It was the way he did it so naturally, like caring for me was instinct, not effort. My chest tightened, and I realized I was falling, whether I admitted it or not. For the first time, I stopped asking myself, what if it ends? And started asking, what if it doesn't? That single shift in thought was terrifying and exhilarating at once. I was no longer running from the fear of love. I was beginning to run toward the possibility of it. And though my walls weren't gone completely, they were crumbling piece by piece. Every glance, every gesture, every word from him pulled me further into a place I had once sworn I'd never go again. A place where love wasn't something to fear, but something to believe in. By the time months had passed, I could hardly recognize the woman I had been before him. I was still me, still 25, still figuring out life, still carrying pieces of my past. But I was no longer weighed down by the same heavy fear. My world had shifted, not because he rescued me, but because he reminded me that love didn't have to be punishment. I remember looking at him one morning across the table, sunlight spilling through the windows, catching the edges of his hair. He wasn't doing anything extraordinary, just sipping his coffee and reading something on his phone, but I felt this overwhelming rush of peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the ground beneath me to collapse. I wasn't bracing for betrayal. I was simply there in that moment, content, safe, and hopeful. It wasn't a fairy tale. We still had differences, our ages, our backgrounds, our worlds. But those differences didn't feel like barriers anymore. Instead, they felt like threads weaving a story that was uniquely ours. He never treated me like I was less because I came from a simpler life. If anything, he seemed to value it. The honesty of my perspective, the way I grounded him when his world threatened to pull him into endless noise. The real turning point for me came during a quiet evening at his home. We had been talking about everything and nothing when he suddenly grew serious. He reached for my hand, the same steady touch that had first broken through my fear, and said, "I don't want you to keep questioning if I'll leave. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Those words sank deeper than I expected. For years, I had been haunted by men who made promises and shattered them. But hearing him say it, not as a performance, not as empty poetry, but with that quiet conviction I had come to know so well, it felt like a vow. Not the kind spoken at an altar, but one lived every day. That night, I let go, truly let go. I let the walls I had clung to for protection finally fall, and what I found wasn't destruction, it was freedom. Loving him wasn't about risking my heart anymore. It was about allowing myself to live fully, to step into the possibility of joy. At 25, I thought my heart was too broken to try again. I thought love was a danger I couldn't afford. But with him, with his patience, his kindness, his steady hand, I discovered that love could be a home. His touch didn't just make me believe in love again, it made me believe in myself, in the woman I could be when fear no longer held me hostage. And that was the beginning of everything new. If this story touched you, please hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs hope today. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been afraid to love again, only to find someone who changed everything? Your story matters.